So I want to talk about this Politico story. I Love Hitler. Leaked messages expose young Republicans' racist chat. A couple of things. One, young Republicans does not mean college or high school. Apparently, unless you are Vice President J.D. Vance, who seemed to believe they were young boys, which, looking at the pictures in this, some of them are balding. Some of them are like in their mid to late 30s. Yeah. Many of the people have like actual political power. I think a side note is that Politico wasn't even looking into this chat. They were looking into whether or not the young Republicans of New York had stolen $40,000, which they joke about in the chat about how they're using it on Ozempic. But you had some really interesting thoughts on kind of the fallout from this, because, like, yes, a bunch of these people have gotten fired, but also there's been this kind of general, like, oh, it's not a big deal. They're children. Don't worry about it. You shouldn't punish people for saying edgy things unless they say mean things about Charlie Kirk's assassination, apparently.
Yeah, so Vance posted about this, and then he did an interview where he explained his thoughts more fulsomely. And the argument boils down to the internet is forever, even group text, and he would tell his kids to be careful what he puts on the internet because it could be exposed by bad actors. But young people deserve the opportunity to make mistakes, be offensive, tell terrible jokes without it destroying their lives. These are kids. And Vance says, I'm not going to clutch my pearls over some group text among young Republicans when you have a guy like Jay Jones, who's the Democratic candidate for Attorney General in Virginia, basically saying that certain political opponents of his and even their kids should die for the benefits of policy change. I'm mischaracterizing both what Vance said about it and what the Jay Jones text said, but the texts were terrible and vile, and that can just be asked and answered. And I found that interesting for a couple of reasons. One, to your point, Jane, they're not kids. They're between 18 and 40. Two, if J.D. Vance wants to live in a permissive speech culture, I'm all for it. But that requires both showing forbearance and grace for people you don't like, which means if kids are joking about gas chambers and shouldn't have their lives ruined over here, then other people being glib about a terrible political assassination or saying things about Israel and Palestine you don't agree over here should be afforded the same generosity and grace. And if the First Amendment is important, it requires a government that isn't going after visas for people that say things that they don't like, that isn't going after corporations and journalists and late night comedians, and all of which is to say, like, if Vance wants to support a culture and society that welcomes free speech and debate and disagreement and even off-color and terrible jokes, I'm all for it, but they're just not practicing it.
No, they're not practicing it. And we know they wouldn't. Like, if this were, young Democrats, this entire conversation would be very different, and J.D. Vance would be leading the charge to get everyone fired and then, I don't know, imprisoned and have their naturalization taken away. Because I think that it really speaks to the in-group, out-group theory of speech policing, which is that the in-group can say whatever they want. Like, you check, are you a Republican? Well, then your jokes about black people and using racial slurs and your anti-Semitic remarks about Jews, being good with money, oh, that's fine. It's totally understandable. And we've seen that over and over and over again, I think, on the right, where there is this idea of no enemies to the right, that, like, actually the further you go right, the more base you are, the more interesting you are. And we have an entire administration of people who are doing this. That's basically every post from the Department of Homeland Security. But the out group, where, you can take someone's visa away for saying something mean about Charlie Kirk, or you can try to get people fired, which J.D. Vance encouraged. J.D. Vance encouraged people to call the employers of people who they saw say mean things about Charlie Kirk. Or even things like about how, like, Charlie Kirk seems like he was kind of a bad guy, but I'm sorry he died. Like, it's just the most obvious example of hypocrisy. And I can't get over this. I also can't get over the fact that all of these people in this chat were just like, I really hope nobody finds this. I really hope nobody finds this.
Brian Kilmeade, he makes an offhand comment about euthanizing homeless people.
Right.
That was on like a Wednesday. It doesn't get a lot of pickup in part because of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. It ultimately gains attention. He apologizes over that weekend. And we move forward. Kimmel makes a comment that Republicans decide to become up in arms about. Before he has a chance to address it, he's off the air. And they can claim whatever they want about whether the FCC played a role. And it obviously, the chair of the FCC was threatening people. And if Joe Biden's administration was wrong for job-owning social media companies about posts it didn't like, of course, the Trump administration is doing far worse by threatening to use its leverage over licenses and mergers. But even putting that aside, do we really want to live in a culture where only your political allies can make mistakes and everybody else has to walk on eggshells? Everyone else has to be fucking perfect or they will come after you. They will try to take your job. Like, I know Vance understands why this is wrong. The old Vance would have been able to explain it quite well. He gets it because, as you point out, he understands these values when he applies them to conservatives: forbearance, accepting apologies, being comfortable disagreeing with people and seeing speeches and opinions you don't like. He gets why it's necessary on his own side, and he can criticize Democrats for failing to do it, but he can't do the work of applying it to Democrats because he's in the same system and competing for the same likes and applause and good comments and hero worship that leads people inside of, whether it's group chats or on Twitter or Discord or any of these forums, to lose themselves in trying to one-up one another and get likes and get attention for performing a lack of empathy, performing ironic distance from terrible things. He's falling prey to the exact same thing, which is why he can't tell the truth about this.
Right. I mean, it's also notable that he has so much time available to guest host a podcast.
Yeah. And it like genuinely makes me sad because we all feel this, right? Like, we all feel it is much easier to be critical of your opponents than it is your friends. It just is, right? Like, if Jay Jones had been a Republican, I am sure I would have been much quicker to my keyboard to say how wrong it is. It is harder to be critical of your own side. It is easier to be more generous with your own side. So even like I just wrote a long post about this in part and was honest about all of this in part because I do think like we will never get good behavior out of Donald Trump. Like, his whole entire like political existence is in defiance of like, forget like attacking democracy as a government. Like, he doesn't understand democracy as just a way of being a person, of like the kind of values that undergird like our basic kind of our like constitution of just treating people with respect, being comfortable, being criticized. He can't take any of that. And so Vance will never do that. But I do think it's incumbent on all of us to try to model these qualities, like to practice democracy in this way, which requires being comfortable with discomfort and knowing that that means sometimes like saying, you know what, at times horrible jokes are a way people kind of say something that's terrible and like in a way that highlights why it's terrible, right? Like, there is some truth to that. I agree with that on some level, while also recognizing that when people start going down the road of like ironically embracing racism or misogyny or hating gay people or hating Democrats or whatever it is, it slowly walks them to a less ironic and more abject and embracing place. Right.
I mean, I generally abide by the rule of goats, that if you're fucking a goat ironically, you're still fucking a goat.
Right. You can't hate watch something. You can't hate eat something.
No.
You know, it's tough to do.
You're just watching and eating and then hating Jews, even if you're like, oh, it's a joke about gas chambers. I'm like, no, but you're still telling a joke about gas chambers.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree with that completely. Full stop. I will say separately, I definitely know. Look, I write jokes every week for a late night show. And in the room, there will be moments where I will test something out because I know it goes way too far just to say it, to like exercise it, to highlight why it's a bad thing to think or say, to like reaffirm the values of it, because that's partly how you kind of work out the bounds of what you truly believe and like how to make a joke in an ethical way. And so like, I do see that. Like, I'm not like, I'm trying to be fair here.
Right.
And because I do believe that people deserve that I want to show forbearance. Like, I do believe people deserve a chance to apologize and prove that they can grow from what they said in the past. Because if apologies are either weakness, that's what the Trump view is, that's why they don't apologize, or fake when it comes from their opponents. That's the only kind of apology that exists. No one's allowed to change or grow. We're never allowed to ratchet down the tension. We just have to exist in a permanent stasis of like hostility and like rage and doubt.
Which I think is what the deeply online J.D. Vance would love us to have. But I do agree with him on one thing.
What's that?
I believe that if you are in your 30s, you are in fact very young.
Yes.
Very young. I am basically a child.
Yes. Well, J.D. Vance and I are contemporaries, and that is tough. But I do see us as basically boys
Just young boys.
Just stickball playing, kickball kicking, locker room joking boys.
Jon, as always, thank you.
Thank you, Jane.